BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. I'm going to devote a large portion of this episode to discussing the book On the Trail of the Zodiac Killer by Francis J. Armstrong. But because this is a Zodiac Killer news report, I wanted to go through several other news items first before I get into the book discussion. And there's actually another Zodiac Killer book out there called The Allen Files by John Bowman, which I look forward to reading in the near future and discussing on Zodiac Monday. And you can tell from the title of it that it's going to be discussing the prime suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery, Arthur Lee Allen. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And one thing that has been uncovered about Arthur Lee Allen that is discussed in the book The Allen Files was sent to me, and it's actually that Arthur Lee Allen was in the Navy, and he received an honorable discharge from the Navy. In a lot of Zodiac Killer sources, you will read that he received a dishonorable discharge, and that this is something where it's trying to show that he was a deviant, that he was not good at following the rules, maybe even some type of illegal behavior. We didn't necessarily know, but there are sources out there. You can even put Arthur Lee Allen into Google and you might find one rather quickly that would state that he received a dishonorable discharge, but that appears to be untrue. He received an honorable discharge, and this is all documented, and he actually also received the China Service Medal while he was in the Navy, and he worked as a radio operator apprentice. So that's just some additional information that is in these files. Again, I'm really looking forward to reading the book, The Allen Files by John Bowman. But and I also just want to point out that this also states that Arthur Lee Allen was 6 feet tall. I have his driver's license photo as well, which confirms that. And it does state, though, that Arthur Lee Allen's weight is at 225 pounds, and some people think that that's almost like the tail end of what the Zodiac's height and weight would have been, because they made impressions of the Zodiac Killer's footprints after the September 27th, 1969 attack, and they were estimated to have come from someone who was 200 to 225 pounds. So Arthur Lee Allen was tall, and he was a bigger guy, but not outside of the parameters, so I have to give full credit to that. It's not like talking about someone who was 6'4" or 6'5" and heavier. And there are Zodiac Killer suspects out there, and I'm sure already you're thinking of a few names that are coming to mind. And moving on to the next news item here, we have something from Chad Burke, who is the author of There Never Was a Zodiac Key, and Chad has spent an enormous amount of time working on the Zodiac Killer's C13 cipher. I've had the opportunity to interview Chad Burke, and at the time he told me that he had spent 5 years on the C13. Now it's probably closer to 6. I interviewed him back in November. And Chad came up with a new possible solution to the Z13 that I think is rather interesting. Now, you might be thinking of some things that have 13 letters in them, 13 letters and word combinations that would work out. But what is something that also has 13 letters or symbols? And Chad has written out KQJ 1098765432 and then A. Already, you can probably see it. When I see KQ, though, I immediately think of Shel Cavalli, the Zodiac suspect, but not quite. This is King, Queen, Jack, and the numbers 10 to 2, and then the A is for the ace. I thought that this was, it's a valiant effort, isn't it? It's rather remarkable. So what Chad did was he took KQJ, the numbers 10 through 2, and then the A would represent 1, that's the ace, but it could also be the number 1, and he matched it up with the 13 letters of the second half of the alphabet. The English language alphabet has 26 letters, and he put them on top of each other, and he made some letter combinations, and it reveals Je ne affirme, which Chad believes means my name is not confirmed, unconfirmed, not affirmed, something to that effect. And I think that this is a reasonable solution, but here's something about the Zodiac Killer's Z13 cipher. And that is, I'm not convinced that the Zodiac wouldn't put his name in there. What I don't think would have happened is, I don't believe that the Zodiac Killer would have put his name in a simple substitution cipher, where you just have to take the symbols out and put in the corresponding English letter, I don't think it would be that easy. I've said this many times on the channel because what if someone were really smart and they cracked the cipher and be like, oh, my name is Arthur Lee Allen. Well, Arthur Lee Allen's going to jail. So what I think that the killer most likely would have done is have one method that is going to be the taunt or the tease. Like, say, for example, my name is unconfirmed. And there was also another solution that was put forward by Wildfire99 where it said, my name is too many to name. And Rick Hansen even proposed that it's a mirrored effect where it says, my name is name my. And I think that all of these are reasonable solutions or reasonable possibilities, except what if the killer were to do something like extremely intricate? Maybe the first letter has some type of connection to his first initial, and then the final letter has some type of connection to his first initial of his last name. Something that wouldn't completely give his identity away, wouldn't give his legal name away, but there would be some type of signature that is hidden in there, which would be very difficult to do with 13 symbols. I do admit that, but I think that it's possible. And I would like to turn it over to you guys. What do you think about that? Do you believe that the Zodiac killer put his name into the Z13 cipher, or are you thinking more like someone such as Chad Burke, author of There Never Was a Zodiac Key, where it's just going to reveal something like, my name is unconfirmed? And I've said very clearly that I think that it's both. I think that there is going to be some type of hint to the killer's actual name that is in the Z13, but I don't think that that's the main solution that we're actually going to find. And we have to have another challenge question as well. What do you think about Chad Burke's proposed solution to the Z13 involving the suit of cards, involving the playing cards, the king, the queen, the jack, and the ace? What do you think about this method? Please put your ideas in the comment section down below. I would love to read them. And we have something that comes to us from Angela Blevins. She is the webmaster of ZodiacKillerX.com. Angela is coming to us from Arkansas, and she has talked about how she believes that there is an Arkansas connection to her Zodiac killer suspect, James Michael Klein. And Angela sent me something where it actually explores a different Zodiac killer Arkansas connection. And this is not Angela's original material. This is actually talking about the murder of Pauline Stormant. Pauline Stormant was murdered in 1971. And there is a composite sketch that does resemble the Zodiac killer that's actually used for the thumbnail of this video. And it's called WhoMurderedPauline.com, a website that is dedicated to her story. And I'm just going to read this article here. It's called Seeking the Devil Within the Details, the Pauline Stormant Murder. Myths and legends don't just materialize. You don't make them out of thin air. Nothing does, nor can it. There's always a kernel of truth beneath, no matter how distorted it might become. And that's from Isaac Asimov. Asimov is fair to say he's a smart guy. He has a lot of insightful statements. I like this one. A little over 50 years ago, on a warm April Monday night, precisely the 12th of April 1971, my cousin Pauline Stormant had her life tragically taken at 9:45 p.m. For most of my life, I knew little about the case except that she was a University of Arkansas student who was murdered while walking home from college. The perpetrator was another student shielded from prosecution, possibly connected to university officials. So how does an Isaac Asimov quote relate to this case? The essential truth lies within the details. How am I related to Pauline Stormant? She's my cousin twice removed, first cousin twice removed, but that doesn't tell the whole story. The connection takes me back to my maternal grandfather, A.J. Stacks, Pauline's first cousin. And the long and short of this is that Pauline Stormant was walking home. As previously stated, she was 27, but she was a student at the University of Arkansas, and she was working on her degree, and she was being followed by a man who was described as being 6 feet tall. He was wearing a brown jacket, and he was acting very suspicious, and there were witnesses who saw this man following her. And it's not just simple as just he was in the area and just kind of like leaning against a telephone pole or something. He was specifically targeting her. And Pauline Stormant was stabbed multiple times, stabbed to death, and the arrests were not made, but there was a man who was found sitting in a car that had blood on his clothes. And, that perhaps is just kind of where the story hits a dead end, because I'm like, well, what happened to that guy? And as you heard from the introduction, they believe that this is a case and where it is a cover-up, but 1971 and in Arkansas, there has been a Zodiac killer connection that has been established, and mostly it centers on the similarities between this perpetrator and the composite sketch. Now, if you ask me, I believe that this sketch looks a lot more like the Lake Berryessa voyeur rather than the one with the crew cut and the glasses that was done after the murder of Paul Stein. And, I mean, I really do see a lot of similarities with the Lake Berryessa voyeur. And it's hard for us to do this because the Lake Berryessa voyeur wasn't wearing glasses, but the hair is parted in a similar way. And there's also the rectangular face that the perpetrator did not have after the Stein murder. There's something that is really different between the Lake Berryessa voyeur and the Zodiac killer's composite sketch from the Stein murder. And that is that the more famous one, the one with the glasses, has a very pointed chin and a very pointed jawline. If you look at the sketch of the murderer of Pauline Stormant, this is someone who has a face that's practically a square, and I mean, this does match the description, but other than that, I don't really think there are a lot of Zodiac killer connections to this one. And I'm also quite curious if some people create these types of images comparing the Stormant sketch to the Zodiac sketch because they want to try and bring some more attention to a particular case. But yes, Pauline Stormant's murder has gone unsolved for 53 years, and I hope that justice will be brought about. But it sounds like this was a police cover-up or a university cover-up. This is another case that could have been solved, should have been solved, but somebody was interfering in the process. And I mean, I also think that this shows that sometimes there are crimes that take place where someone is stabbed, where they're targeted, like Sherry Jo Bates was in 1966, and there isn't necessarily a clear motive other than somebody has a problem with women. That, I mean, she's stabbed, not sexually assaulted, she wasn't robbed, like, those aren't the primary focuses here. This person just wanted to murder a specific woman. And with Pauline Stormant, it appears based on the witness testimony that she was specifically targeted and followed, and this person had a reason. That doesn't necessarily mean that he was in her inner circle of friends or something like that. It means that he wanted to perhaps murder a woman who had her description. From time to time that can happen. You must have heard that stuff about Ted Bundy, and he would target women who had a particular type of appearance, long brown hair that was parted in the middle. That was something that stood out to him. And I mean, there can be things like that, rage and animosity toward women. And with the Bates murder that took place in 1966, where Sherry Jo Bates was viciously stabbed to death, we just don't have those types of details from witnesses that they saw a man who was 6 feet tall with a brown jacket following her late at night. And if we did, maybe that case would be solved as well. And right now, I would like to move on to the next segment, but first, I will get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this program at BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88, and anyone who uses that website to make a donation or contribution to help support the show will get a shoutout on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Thank you so much for regular and consistent support, and Batman66 has also helped out a lot with the YouTube shorts. I apologize for not putting those out this week. There's just been some hectic things going on, moving house, so to speak, but as soon as everything is settled and out of the suitcases, then I'm going to be getting back to making YouTube shorts, which are also released on Facebook and Instagram, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, and Ned Dahan on Facebook. Those links are in the description box. And you can also view the YouTube shorts here on this page here, Black Box Online Radio on YouTube, and I've been focusing more on true crime stories that are dealing with serial killers and unsolved mysteries. When I first started making the shorts last year, any subject was fair game pretty much. I was even talking about some military things from World War II and so on, but now I'm just getting back to the roots of true crime, and those should be coming back as early as next week. And Batman66, thank you so much for all your help that you have done with those. Now, the next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery, another regular and consistent supporter, greatly appreciated as well. And we also have a shout out for Dennis G, who has been providing a lot of the images that you're looking at in this Zodiac Killer News Report. A lot of the images that are on the screen have been found by Dennis G, so thank you so much. And I've been in contact with Dennis G at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. That's the email address for the show. Anybody can write the show if they have something that they want to share or discuss. And if anybody has things that they are curious about in regards to the Zodiac Killer mystery, that's a great way to stay in touch and to share larger pieces of information. And I also got in touch with Sandy Betts, not via email, but on Facebook. And Sandy Betts made a rather interesting observation about a photo of Donna Lass. Donna Lass went missing on September 6th of 1970 while working at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino. Her remains were found in 1986 in Placer County, California. And Donna Lass was photographed once with a very particular type of earring. And Sandy Betts said that she received an earring that was rather similar from her stalker, and a man who was stalking her. I mean, I'm not going to go through her whole story, but she was being stalked by a person whom she believes is the Zodiac Killer, her Zodiac Killer suspect. She doesn't know his last name, but his first name is Tony. And she sent me this photo of Donna Lass and was comparing the earring that she received from the stalker to the one that Donna Lass was wearing. And I was first just thinking, now wait a second, what is this? I mean, I don't see any similarity at all. Like, the one that Donna Lass was wearing appeared to be just like a simple stud, and the one that Sandy Betts showed in the photograph was something that had the letter D in it. But what Sandy told me to do was to zoom in, and you can actually see that there is a letter D in Donna Lass's earring. I mean, D for Donna, right? And that you can see that there is a darkened shape that goes in more or less a half circle, but it's not completely closed. And I was like, yeah, actually, I do see it. I do see it. I would never have thought to look for it. But when you zoom in, you can see that it does resemble a letter D, maybe not 100% certain that that is the letter D, but I mean, someone named Donna Lass wearing a pair of earrings that has the letter D on it, that could be something there. But now, did the Zodiac Killer murder Donna Lass and take her earring as a trophy and then give it to somebody else? Perhaps. I would definitely withhold a little bit of judgment, because I would be very skeptical. I mean, and I would approach that with a very high degree of skepticism, because you want to know the facts, right? And I'm just simply going to see how that one unfolds. But this is something, though, that, I mean, I was surprised that I was even able to actually see what Sandy was talking about, and I do agree that the letter D can be seen in Donna Lass's earring. Now, I said that I was going to talk about the book On the Trail of the Zodiac Killer by Francis J. Armstrong, and I was going to do this as a book discussion, like last week when I did one on Unsolved Murders, the Zodiac Killer, and Jack the Ripper by Patrick Auerbach. And I'm actually glad that you guys sent me so many things to respond to, because, to be honest with you, this book, On the Trail of the Zodiac Killer, doesn't necessarily deserve an individual book discussion, because 75% of it, maybe 85% of it, is just summary. It's just summarizing the events. And there are books out there that don't have a specific suspect, and some of them I actually thought were pretty good. But with the presentation in this one, I was sitting on a train and I was reading it, and I just got to a point where I was like, oh my goodness, I'm over 2/3 of the way done with the book. It's about 100 pages long, and it's all just summary. Once in a while, there are these little insertions of some commentary, and I just think that the book needs way more commentary. When we're talking about summarizing stuff, on December 20th of 1968, there was a double homicide that took place with David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, and they were murdered, and talking about stuff like that. 75% of the book is just recapping the Zodiac Killer's crimes, and these pieces of information are free online. You can go to Tom Voigt's website, where the police reports are available. You can also get the police reports and Zodiac Killer Just the Facts. But when talking about the Lake Herman Road murders, here's something from Francis J. Armstrong that I want to challenge. First, there's the discussion on the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, and then it goes to the second Zodiac Killer crime, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, which saw the death of Darlene Ferrin and the shooting of Mike Mageau. And what Francis J. Armstrong wrote in the book was, these two crimes were almost identical. And I'm just thinking, why? I used to think that. I used to think that they were very similar. Now, once you get under the surface in the world of the Zodiac Killer, the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs shooting are anything but identical. Let's look at all of the differences. Firstly, the victims are ordered out of the car at Lake Herman Road, or at the very least, only looking at the facts, their bodies were found outside of the vehicle, whereas the victims of the Blue Rock Spring shooting were shot inside the vehicle. I think that Francis J. Armstrong is looking at the fact that both of these crimes had couples that were parked in cars in lovers lane style settings. They were both involving a man and a woman, and they're in a vehicle. But other than that, what really is similar? I mean, as I said, the victims were ordered out at Lake Herman Road. David Faraday was shot execution style, more or less. I mean, he's shot with one bullet to the head. And Mike Michaud at Blue Rock Springs was just sprayed with bullets. He was just shot multiple times. And the Zodiac killer even wrote about this in a letter when he was saying that he tried to shoot him, but the boy spoiled his aim by moving his leg, so he shot him in the knee. All of that stuff is completely different. And then the Zodiac then goes back. He retreats for a little bit, then comes back and shoots Mike Michaud again. Not to mention, you can even look at our other differences in the way the whole thing was set up. And this might seem a little bit petty, but you have Mike Michaud sitting in the passenger seat at the Blue Rock Springs shooting, and the Zodiac killer approached the passenger side of the car first, whereas David Faraday, the male victim at Lake Herman Road, was sitting in the driver's seat. I mean, the order is even off. For the longest time, I thought that Mike Michaud would have been sitting in the driver's seat for that very reason, and for the longest time, I mean, until I got under the surface in the Zodiac world and actually started investigating this stuff. But there are still even channels like the infographics show Mike Michaud sitting in the driver's seat. People just made that assumption. But even that is different. Now, that's not because of the Zodiac killer. The Zodiac didn't order them to sit that way, but that's just another difference with the crime scene. And you just have all of these differences. The Zodiac is a horribly inconsistent serial killer. And how about this, in terms of forensics? A different firearm was used. The Zodiac used a .22 caliber firearm at Lake Herman Road, and then he used a 9mm Luger at Blue Rock Springs. All types of differences. I mean, I don't think anybody will come to the immediate conclusion that these two had to have been the same killer, if not for the phone calls and the letters, and the Zodiac killer taking credit for it. But this is not really something where I just mean to kind of hunker down on and just go on and on and on, but I'd probably do this for about 3 hours talking about all the differences between Blue Rock Springs and Lake Herman Road. I just simply wanted to point out that that was something in the book that I disagreed with. But there are other sections in the book. As I said, it starts out with a very extensive summary of the crimes, and then it talks about the suspects for a while, but there's also a psychological profile, and this is actually on page 101. I said it's 100 pages, but it's actually 110 pages. Page 101, The Psychological Profile by Francis J. Armstrong. Judging by what we know of the Zodiac's crimes, the perpetrator can be deemed by FBI classifications as an organized offender. This means that the Zodiac killer left his house with the intention of committing murder and came fully equipped with everything he needed to carry out such an attack and escape without leaving any traces of himself behind. Now, mostly I agree with that. I absolutely do think that the Zodiac was mentally organized. So when people are pushing suspects that are paranoid schizophrenics, I tend to be a little bit wary, but as you guys know, one person that I talk about a lot on this channel is Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and he was a schizophrenic who was extremely organized, so it can happen. The fact that the Zodiac killer committed these acts and was able to remove all evidence of his physical presence behind suggests a lot about the perpetrator. Well, that's not really true now, is it? The Zodiac left behind shell casings at Lake Herman Road. The Zodiac left behind the bindings that were used to tie Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. The Zodiac killer possibly even left behind bloody fingerprints. We aren't necessarily sure. There are some doubts about the fingerprint evidence, but the Zodiac left a lot of evidence behind. Now, nothing extremely damning or something. You know, if the Zodiac had been in some type of altercation, or let's say, hypothetically, if one of the victims had fought back or something like the way Robert Domingos did in 1963 about the man who attacked him, and that the Zodiac was cut, and that they had his blood on something, that would be something that would be much more likely to preserve I mean, that would be something that could solve the case, but I just don't think that evidence like that exists. But the Zodiac did leave a lot of evidence behind. Firstly, he understood to a small degree the processes of law enforcement. I agree. This can often imply a connection with the police and perhaps a 911 dispatcher, a clerical assistant, or even a police officer. This strange notion, however, given that the Zodiac's literacy skills do not seem to indicate someone of high intelligence, although his crimes and lack of trace evidence imply that he had a degree of intellectual capability. Well, there could be numerous reasons why the Zodiac comes across as someone who is not extremely literate. And what I think Francis Armstrong is talking about is that when the Zodiac Killer wrote letters, he made a lot of mistakes with the spelling errors. And also in the ciphers, too, there are mistakes, particularly in the 408. All types of misspellings are in there. And I think that people really zone in on this, and this is one that can be easily misinterpreted because I mean, Adam Ivester, who runs the channel Real Zodiac Killer Revealed, just likes to talk about this all day about how he believes that the Zodiac Killer had mild dyslexia, and he's citing Soren Korsgaard, author of America's Jack the Ripper, for the analysis, but he just found some very similar things with his Zodiac Killer suspect, John Parr Cox, who was not a dumb man by any means, but on one of his forms that he filled out, he misspelled the word Japanese because he had mild dyslexia, and he openly talked about this in the book Par Terminal by Judith K. Dunning. So, I mean, just because somebody is misspelling words, it doesn't mean that they have any issues with their intellect. There could be things like mild dyslexia. It could also mean that the Zodiac is doing it for comedic effect. And that is one of the perhaps strongest theories. That's one of the most widely discussed theories that people have. Like, why did the Zodiac misspell words? I mean, did he really not know how to spell Christmas? So, a lot of people think that the Zodiac did it because he was just trying to entertain himself. And even Steve Odell talks about this in his Zodiac Killer observations when he says that the misspellings are just red herrings. They're inserted into the Zodiac Killer mystery to throw people off, to keep people guessing, but there's no secret code in the misspellings or anything like that. And back to the psychological profile. In one letter, the killer made reference to coating his fingertips with cement in order to avoid leaving fingerprints, a further skill which suggests he had high scientific intelligence know-how. High scientific intelligence know-how. Well, I mean, even a fool would know that you're going to touch things and leave fingerprints behind, and this is stuff that you're going to find in different sources all across the spectrum. I mean, I even remember when I did the episode on Clay the serial killer, I worked it into a Zodiac Killer news report, and Clay the serial killer called into the Howard Stern show and said that he had this idea for taking the victim's thumb, dipping it in red paint or blood, and leaving a fingerprint and mailing it in as a signature. Now, it's possible that that was just a hoax call, or something that was a hoaxer and not a real serial killer, but he said that he got the idea from a comic book, and this was like in 1997. Well, people are exposed to those types of things. I mean, does the Zodiac really have high scientific knowledge because he put airplane cement on his fingertips? I mean, this is just like cement that you could get at any odd store anywhere in the Bay Area. I don't necessarily know that. I think that's perhaps giving the Zodiac too much credit. I mean, all you have to do is read a comic book, read a kid's novel or something about somebody putting airplane cement on their fingertips, testing it out, and see if it works or not. I mean, it's really quite simple. And let's keep going. In some cases, the threats sent by the Zodiac Killer via mail do not correspond with the killer's real-world actions. For example, the original cryptograms which were sent make references to hunting man, and man being the most dangerous animal of all. This statement is in contrast with all of the Zodiac's actions because at no point did he hunt man. In fact, his actions suggest the exact opposite. Well, I don't quite agree with that. The Zodiac Blitz attacked the majority of the victims besides Sherry Jo Bates, but we do not know much about her murder. Well, also, I don't even believe Sherry Jo Bates was a victim of the Zodiac Killer, which suggests that he was unconfident in his ability to control them. The only time he can be considered to have hunted man was when several of his victims began to flee at mid-attack, to which he shot them from a reasonable distance. Now, that should be referring to the Domingos Edwards murders, and if Francis J. Armstrong wants to make the case that the Domingos Edwards murders were committed by the Zodiac Killer, I will hear you out. I mean, I've said many times, I think that the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards have the highest chance of being Zodiac related out of all of the unconfirmed crimes. All of them. I mean, that has the highest chance. But we have to we have to stick to the facts to a certain extent and just say that's not a confirmed crime. You might believe that, Francis J. Armstrong, but that crime is unconfirmed. So, absolutely, the Zodiac hunted people for sport. Think about everything that I said in regards to Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, where you have somebody approaching couples, parked in cars, and they're shot, and they're just gunned down. Someone is just murdering them. Yes, the Zodiac is hunting people for sport. Was the Zodiac a coward and a weakling? Yeah, absolutely. But he did hunt people for sport. Lake Berryessa as well. This is a very clear case of someone practically stalking his prey, walking up to the tree line and putting on the hooded costume and mask. There is a certain ceremonial aspect to the Lake Berryessa stabbing because the Zodiac is wearing a costume and he is making up some weird, silly story. And there's a discussion on that where Francis J. Armstrong, not to go off on a giant tangent, but Francis Armstrong writes about this in the book. Why on earth would the Zodiac killer do something like that? It's just completely different than the other crimes. And I think that the Zodiac was telling the story to Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, where he comes from the tree line wearing the black hooded costume and he says, I'm an escaped convict. I killed a prison guard in Deer Lodge, Montana. All I want's your money. I'm trying to go to Mexico. I think that he was just making up that silly story so they wouldn't be afraid. He's trying to maintain control of the situation. And this is the stuff that Richard Walter likes to talk about when he says the Zodiac was a power assertive serial killer. That's what I think is the most important takeaway from that there. But then let's keep going with this. The Zodiac killer's writing style appears to indicate that he has a lifelong hatred of women. I don't necessarily know if it's the Zodiac's writing that indicates that. People often look to the fact that the female victims appear to have been more, well, the female victims died in all of the Zodiac's attempts at murdering women. Two of the male victims survived. That's why people think that the Zodiac hated women. I don't really think that the Zodiac letters indicate anything about that. And, let's look at some of these things. Let's look at some of this. What exactly is Francis Armstrong saying? The biggest issue is that the Zodiac used an enormous amount of brutality on Mike Mageau at Blue Rock Springs, and that's just a very clear example of someone who was not a female victim, and the Zodiac is just shooting him multiple times, shooting him in the face, the bullets going through his tongue and his jaw and all of that. And Darlene Ferrin was also shot multiple times, and she died, passed away from her injuries. But I don't necessarily think that anything that the Zodiac wrote about would indicate that he hated only women. The Zodiac was very clear about what he's trying to do. He wants to hunt men because it's a thrilling experience. By men, I mean like mankind. Man is the most dangerous animal of all. He thinks that it's a thrilling experience, and he wants to do this so he can have slaves in the afterlife. Maybe that's modeled on some type of Egyptian mythology, or maybe it's something completely different, and maybe it's just something that he came up with one day. We really are not sure. But, I mean, if anything, the Zodiac is just saying he wants to hunt people. Many lowercase letters possess hard edges which are thought to be subconscious applications of masculine lettering and a desire to remove any trace of femininity. Okay, Francis Armstrong, you beat me. I have no response for that. I have no response for that. You win that one. I'm not sure what to say about that. When this notion is taken to its extreme, it expresses a man capable of killing women in order to exact revenge. Revenge, then, is perhaps the Zodiac's key motivator. His murders possess no sexual element whatsoever. Sexual gratification is rarely achieved by gunshot, and if it was, there would likely have been further evidence to indicate sexual assault, although later theories suggest that the Zodiac was primarily concerned with infamy and notoriety. This could very easily have been a byproduct of the murders. Very little attention has been given to the Zodiac's claims of paradise and slaves. Now I have to stop there, because I want to respond to the preceding material, but the paradise and slaves connection, people talk about that all the time, particularly because of the Halloween card that was mailed on October 27th of 1970, where there's the intersecting words slaves and paradise. I mean, there are just countless examples of this coming to light. And I mean, no, I don't agree with that at all. Very little attention has been given to this. And I also want to point out that Francis Armstrong writes this Paradise, Paradise, and the Zodiac always spelled it Dice. So that also just goes to show that it's quite possible that the Zodiac was just fudging the misspellings and doing it on purpose. But I said that I would go back to this thing here. So if somebody is trying to do a revenge murder instead of a murder for sexual gratification, let's read this sentence again. His murders possess no sexual element whatsoever. Sexual gratification is rarely achieved by gunshot, and if it was, there would likely have been further evidence to indicate sexual assault. Oh, sure. Think about everything that I told you about Pauline Stormant, about the murder that took place in 1971, which I was discussing earlier on in the episode. Think about all of those details, where you have some guy stalking down the woman, and he's attacking her by knife. Now, this comes up a lot in the Jack the Ripper stories, where they believe that the Ripper was not sexually assaulting the victims, but he was getting some type of sexual gratification from committing the mutilations, the disemboweling of the women. And with a murderer like Pauline Stormant's, I would think that she was a victim because of some type of sexual gratification. I mean, I think that the killer was getting some sexual gratification from the murder, based on the way that that was committed, and it's quite possible with Sherry Jo Bates as well. And if you have any takeaway at all from this episode, can it just be that sometimes women are targeted for this reason? She's not sexually assaulted, nothing is stolen, but the killer is experiencing a type of arousal from stabbing the woman. And Francis Armstrong talks about this stuff in other parts of the book, about how the knife can be an extension of the human body, so to speak. And I know that's getting a little bit metaphysical, or so to speak, but I mean, it's just that the knife's an extension of the human body because you're actually feeling the actions of the knife, whereas someone isn't going to be feeling the bullets as they go in to a victim. Terrible things, but that stuff is discussed in the book, and we are talking about murderers. So, I mean, I think that the Zodiac does get some type of sexual gratification. How about the Lake Berryessa stabbing? Sure. How about somebody like David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Shooter? A lot of people believe those were sexually motivated crimes, and he's not stabbing the victims. How about Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber? People believe that those were sexually motivated crimes, but he's not even shooting the victims. He's detonating bombs. So that is something that I don't agree with. And finally, we have, although there is little possibility of the Zodiac killer being anything other than a white male, it is an interesting notion, especially in regards to the Zodiac's inciting terror tactics. These strange claims are not dissimilar to the Islamic notion of acquiring slaves in an afterlife if one lives a decent and honest life in the name of Allah. Well, talk about a massive 180. You're like, yeah, the Zodiac is a serial killer. He hunts people for sport. Maybe he hates women. Allahu Akbar. And now it's just like an absolute 180. No, I don't really think that the Zodiac killer was a Muslim. I mean, some people have a Muslim, not a Muslim suspect. Oh, the Jordanian immigrant named Hesham Zayed. He's a suspect in the murder of Paul Stein. I heard once that he was a Christian Arab, actually, and he was not a Muslim, but I haven't confirmed that. But I want to digress from that, because I don't necessarily think the Zodiac is talking about slaves in the afterlife in regards to Islam. In fact, I'm not even necessarily familiar with that in Islam. It's not like I just have the Quran right here and I can pick it up and find the exact surah. But I think that perhaps I've heard of the 72 virgins that you're going to get in the afterlife if you do something in the name of Allah, but I don't think there's any Islamic connection to the Zodiac killer mystery, and I don't mean to go off on some religious spiel or anything. It's just this is what's in the Zodiac book, On the Trail of the Zodiac Killer, The Mystery Behind America's Most Feared Serial Killer by Francis J. Armstrong. And can we just say that I disagree with that? I think that Francis Armstrong's perhaps conflating a few different things. The Egyptian mythological connection, now that is something that we can talk about, because was the Zodiac inspired by Egyptian mythology, trying to become a pharaoh? Or, as I said, it could also come from a different type of movie or book or TV show that isn't even necessarily religious. And the conclusion. There is something to be said of an allure of an unsolved mystery. While the Zodiac Killer's body count is by no means the greatest in criminal history, it is his almost fictional tale of clues, ciphers, and bizarre antics which cements his legacy as an unsolved enigma. Yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, I think it's the persona that pulls people into this. And I've thought about this so many times that the Zodiac Killer case, it sounds like a fictional story. It sounds like something that is right out of a movie, but it's all real. These are all real events. I think about that a lot. Over the years, professional and amateur researchers alike have studied the Zodiac case in incredible detail, but there's little substantial evidence, to effectively link anyone with the crimes committed. I agree 100%. There have been some incredible outlandish theories, but over the years, the Zodiac Killer's true identity has never been revealed. Some researchers believe him to have a very old Jack the Ripper coming back for one final reign of terror. I mean, I don't know, I think that's a metaphorical statement. Others believe that he was the Unabomber, or a discarded member of the Manson family. His crimes will go down in history alongside those of the other elusive phantom killers who were never brought to justice. Well, let's be clear. The Unabomber was brought to justice. The Manson family was brought to justice. And perhaps he's referring to Bruce Davis, the right-hand man of Charles Manson, who was a Zodiac Killer suspect. But really, multiple members of the Manson family get worked into the Zodiac Manson connection. And overall, I mean, I don't think that that's the strongest theory, but the Unabomber was definitely caught, and he passed away in prison. The case lives on in our collective conscious. It has since been classified as an inactive case as of 2004 due to lack of advancements, leads, and other priorities of the authorities. But it has been reopened, meaning that the case will remain stagnant until forensic advancements allow us to move forward, if ever at all. And one more time, if anybody would like to read this book, this is called, the official title is The Zodiac Killer, but it's actually On the Trail of the Zodiac Killer by Francis J. Armstrong. And as I said, this is perhaps a book that wouldn't be worthy of a full book discussion because so much of it is just a summary, and even though I disagreed with a lot of the observations in it, sometimes there can be a certain benefit in reading different points of view, and I would say that it was better than Patrick Auerbach's book, which I was discussing last week, Unsolved Murders, The Zodiac Killer, and Jack the Ripper. That will be all for me now. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram. But please, put some ideas in the comments section down below about what you'd like to hear about on Zodiac Monday. You can also hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And I'll see you guys over on Instagram. Goodbye.